Hello Internet, I am the hero of Julios, once again with another episode of my Saltmarsh vlog. In today's episode, not actually a lot happened. Not a lot happened in terms of things that happened, but a lot happened in terms of setting things up for greater events. So, the party got back to Saltmarsh from their misadventures. Most of them went back to the Wicker Goat. A couple went to the guard barracks to sort of like just let someone know that they completed their missions. Uh, the butler told them, they'd have to wait a few days, but eventually the party found themselves in front of Gellin Primewater, Eleander, and Ada, one of the council members they had yet to meet. In fact, I decided to introduce her in an interesting way. So, in the party, they were heading back, and it was starting to get late, so stores were closing down, and believe it was the druid who asked me if they could make it in time to the leather worker so that they could turn in some items that they had acquired. I'll get to the items they acquired later. But I told them, I guess if you made it like right in time, you might get them as they're flipping the door over to the sign from open to close. Naturally, the druid takes this as a challenge and turns into a horse. So, picture this. You're a town guard member. You're walking through the streets, and suddenly a random horse you've never seen before comes galloping through the area. Naturally, you'd want to try and stop the horse. So they do their typical horse stopping techniques, the whoaing, the patting its head, the trying to, get it, to calm down. Obviously, the druid, being an actual thinking being, decides I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to, jump over them and keep running. So they apprehend the horse. They grab the horse, they throw parabolas to get its legs and knock it over to the ground because a rampaging horse can be problemsome. Then he decides to change back. But he changes back right in front of a new council member's house. So she comes out, she speaks with the druid briefly, and he tells her about the pelts they obtained, such as the troll skin. Flashback a few hours earlier in the session, and you go to the fighter who is walking by himself through Saltmarsh, just sort of taking in the scenery, listening to things as they're happening. And he overhears some people talking behind a restaurant about a giant claw mark on their back door and knocked over garbage cans. And of course, the players ask me what the name of the restaurant is, and I, being the DM, had absolutely no clue because I just said a restaurant. So I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, and I'm like, okay, every single restaurant, tavern, inn, pub, building in all of D&D is named after two very important things: an adjective and a noun. So I think the salted, because it's Saltmarsh, bean, because it's food. Not realizing that the bard's name is Bean, so now it sounds. They're all like, "You salted the bard! Why did you pour salt on the bard?" Of course, so it's become a joke now, but not the point. The point is, the salted bean was assaulted behind its back door by a giant claw mark. The party sets off to head into the woods to try and find the monster that caused this claw mark. And the druid actually uses one of his new spells, which, by the way, he was using a lot of different spells. I won't go into detail on all of them, but he is starting to take advantage of the full spell list of druids, which is really good. And as he's talking to a bird, the bird tells him about a cat that kind of vanishes and reappears and maybe waves around, and eventually the players happen upon the displacer beast. Prior to this, though, they set up a trap, a big pitfall for the beast to fall into. However, the druid failed his stealth rolls, and as a result, the displacer beast saw him, and it's getting ready to pounce, and he turns into a squirrel, and the beast pounces at him, misses because of the bard. The bard, not the bean. Bean the bard. The bard is flying, because they're a fairy, flying above the pitfall trap. So the beast jumps up, tries to get the bard, and after it hits the bard a little bit, falls. The bard was flying 15 feet up, the pitfall is 10 feet down. The beast took 2d6 of falling damage because that's over 20 feet. It seemed like a fair fight for a bit, but eventually I was realizing that the monster itself wasn't actually getting a lot of damage in, and they were doing way more damage to it. Not a single player was actually worried about their safety, so that's when I introduced a troll. Now, normally I'm not trying to up the danger or up the excitement randomly, but unfortunately, my fighter, this is his last session for a while. There's going to be something that is keeping him from us for a few months on end, and I wanted to see him off with something exciting that didn't leave a cliffhanger in the main quest line. So, hence the troll, and they actually managed to defeat the troll. But as they're fighting the troll, the monk in the party, a fellow dungeon master, actually leans over to the sorcerer and says, "Use fire." And I look at him, and I said, "You are being very cheeky with me." And by cheeky, I meant metagaming. I'm not super against metagaming in the sense that if you're a dungeon master, you've read the books, you know that goblins have 7 HP, you know that red dragons breathe fire. There are just things that you innately know about what you're up against without even wanting to know what you're up against. However, this does not give you an excuse to tell the other players what you're up against. Granted, the sorcerer in the party, fellow player, who has been with me since my first campaign, I already knew that a troll's weakness was fire, so this wasn't, exactly metagaming, and I don't usually punish things like that unless they're maliciously done. I actually really appreciate that in character, he tried psychic damage first, which is always his go-to. He tried cold damage next, which didn't seem to do anything different. Then he tried fire damage. So he was just kind of in character trying to guess the elemental types. They weren't in enough danger that metagaming would have saved their bacon. This was a good time for that sort of thing. As it ended, they managed to successfully skin the displacer beast and the troll to use both their hides for leatherworking and give them to the leatherworker for a massive amount of gold. Not sure what they'll spend it on, but there is a person in town who does deal in magic items. More on that later. Cut to back what I was talking about before I was talking about the troll. They finally meet with the council. They get their reward for clearing out the ghost house. They ask for the ghost house as their property. However, it is property of Saltmarsh and will be handled with accordingly. In fact, it will be refurbished. So I think I'll let the players buy it at a later date if they still want it by then. But I think they'll be more interested in the next part of the adventure where they get their own boat. The most interesting part, though, was when the monk stood before the council and gave the full report, a list of what was missing, a list of what was found, a list of how many people were in there and how 2 of the smugglers got away. And then he said, "DM, before I give them the name of the leader of the smugglers, may I do an insight check to see if any of the 3 of them react differently to this name?" And I said, "Go ahead." So he rolls actually pretty high, and then he says, "The leader of the bandits was Sambalay, a mage of sorts." And for the first time in a very long time, I stood up from my table, I walked around, I told him to come with me, and I whispered to him. Gellin Primewater shifted uncomfortably in his seat briefly. So, with that information, I don't know what he'll do with it, but he knows that Gellin was in on the smuggling. Now, what's interesting about this is the monk and another member of the party, I believe the druid, I have it in my notes, but the 2 of them are actually going to go to the local wizard tower in Saltmarsh, and they're going to talk to him. Well, he's in cahoots with Gellin Primewater because that's how he gets some of his more rare components, so I'm interested to see how that's going to play out. All in all, though, I'm starting to set it up that Gellin, if I have to end early because the store that I DM for, they have a set amount of weeks that I'm allowed. If I have to end it early, I'm going to have Gellin as the main villain. If I have an extended period of time, Gellin will be a pawn in a greater plan of whatever I decide to be the final villain, whether it's the Sahagins, whether it's Granny Nightshade, I believe is her name, or maybe just one of the petty vampires that serves her. However I weigh this out, it all depends on what levels they are, how many weeks I have left. Regardless, though, we're starting to shape things up for the midpoint of our brief campaign, but a campaign nonetheless. So, hope you stick around for that. Thank you for watching as always, and I will see you in the next video. This is the Hero of Helios, Xing out. Oh, actually, I forgot. I did want to mention that the monk did go to the grove. He did successfully bury the body of the innocent, innocent. He was actually a member of the smugglers. He met a gnome druid in there. Don't know if that's going to come up later in the story, but if it does, I wanted to at least have that here in the vlog. So, that's it. Xing out. Bye.